Hello and welcome to the Reason Roundtable. This is your weekly libertarian take on news and culture from editors of Reason Magazine and friends. If you're tired of the choices offered by today's politics, you have come to the right place. I'm your host, Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by my illustrious colleague, Matt Welch, as well as very special guests, two of them. We have hater of tariffs and lover of beer, Reason's very own Eric Boehm. Our next guest is the Washington correspondent for Unheard, the co-host of Breaking Points, and the host of the new late night show, After Party. Folks, it's Emily Jashinsky. Welcome to the show.
What a kind introduction and a loud introduction. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, volume is something I specialize in. I'm really sorry we can't drink on the show. I understand that that's what you do on late night, or on the after party.
Yeah, it's a little too early. I mean, it's not too early, but I guess technically it's too early. We have to say that officially.
It's too early for me, but it might not be too early for you. I don't know when you're listening to this podcast in podcast land out there, right? And in any case, we are probably going to talk about how tariffs are making booze more expensive. So we'll get some alcohol into this show somehow or another. All right. Happy Monday, everyone, except men, or at least men as portrayed in the New York Times. So I was thinking about this, and I want to tell a story really quick before we get to the New York Times articles, because do you guys remember those days since accident signs that used to be in workplaces? Like if you worked at a Wendy's or if you worked at a construction site, never worked at either, but you'd go through the drive-through and you could see these things, right? There would be these signs that you'd have in a workplace, right? And they'd say days since accident, it was a counter. And I sometimes think that there should be one of those counter signs, except instead of days since accident, it should be days since viral what's up with men think piece. And just about every day, the New York Times would have to reset to 0, because in the past few weeks, the Gray Lady has run pieces with the following headlines, just as an example. So here are the headlines. Men, where have you gone? Please come back. We're right here, three of us. Why women are weary of the emotional labor of man keeping. The trouble with wanting men. So this seems like kind of like an obsession, or at least a genre. I don't know, maybe it's a red flag. But I also think it goes further than that, because all of this is happening at the exact same time that the Democratic Party is struggling with male voters, especially young men without college degrees. Democratic Party, the left, the media outlets that serve them, they know they have a problem. So Emily, I want to start with you. Connect the dots for me here. Is this just a media phenomenon, or does it have larger implications for politics?
I do like how you ceded the floor to the one woman here to help explain what's going on with men.
You're a media critic.
What don't we understand?
I'm about to woman-splain. So one of the interesting things about all of these pieces is that they sort of like grope at something real that could actually be helpful for the broader left to understand about men. One of them, for example, just is kind of like bouncing around the edges of a genuine problem of male loneliness, which hopefully none of you can speak to, but I'm told is a very real thing. And yet it takes this, it can't quite shake the exact same ideological lens that has been applied in the New York Times to these problems over and over again for the better part of a decade. Like my college job was working for Christina Hoff Sommers, and I can tell you this stuff reads just like what was being printed in The Atlantic in 2012 that people at the time were saying is going to destroy the left, and is actually, in fact, in the process of destroying the left. And that really culminated, I think, probably in 2024. So that's one of the things that I find interesting about all of these think pieces, is that they're still kind of dancing around the edges of the problem and just not capable of actually kind of conceding the fundamental point they need to.
The Atlantic's cover stories, I think, have played a larger role in this phenomenon of think piece than I think a lot of people who are not sort of astute observers of media have understand. It all goes back, I think, to the cover story, Can Women Have It All? Right. And it was a story of just sort of asking the question about, can women have careers and have families? And it did huge business for them. I mean, it was just the most talked about story for a very long time. And they ended up trying to go back and replicate that success again and again and again.
It was Christine Rosen, I think.
I think that's right. Right. But then you just saw this spate of cover stories that like covered a lot of the same sort of territory, or same sort of like The End of Men, right? Some of these ended up being books. And again, these are these are in some ways worthwhile and interesting questions to ask, but we see so many of them now. Matt Welch, I want to go to you about the political aspects of this. And I actually just want to read you another New York headline, a New York Times headline from about a month ago. This is from Thomas Edsel in the opinion section on July 8th. Democrats have a massive blind spot when it comes to male issues, right? So we have been reading about this. We've heard about this, right? There was this proposal recently for Democratic donors to fund like a $20 million study to basically understand what's up with men, like a $20 million what's up with men think piece, got to reset the sign. How did this gender gap happen in politics, in media, and is there something to be done about it?
Well, I would start with, if we're talking about the New York Times, acknowledging that it's basically a lifestyle brand or a cluster of lifestyle brands that publishes a newspaper on the side. And as such, their readership is so unlike the rest of the country. It's 91% Democratic, their readership. It is 72% people with college degrees, which is twice as much as the national average. So you have this kind of knowledge class, urban, kind of professional people. And so a lot of especially the opinion journalism side of it is geared towards their very idiosyncratic set of neuroses. It's also more female than many sort of public affairs type of newspapers and other things are. It's about half and half, but though that space, including for a reason, disproportionately skews male rather than female. It's been that way for a very long time. So they are serving that readership, but that readership doesn't look anything like America. I mean, if you like trotted out these headlines that you read at the beginning into basically 95% of the country, they'd be like, yeah, what? Like, it doesn't even translate. So to the extent to which that these types of spaces are kind of, professional knowledge class people, and then that is the place where Democrats or a swath of sort of society talks to itself about its own issues, then it is reinforcing this bubble that, yes, has an impact in politics, especially just culturally. There was a piece in the Times that may have been kind of similar, and we might have even talked about it. It's hard because they all kind of blur together. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, guys like, maybe you shouldn't hate all of your Republican. Maybe you don't have to shun your Republican family members. And it's like, what? Yeah, maybe. The jury's still not out yet on that. Like, that is just, you're not, human beings don't talk like this. But if people who are kind of insulated in their own place and talking to each other for years and decades, this is what it produces. Is it a problem for Democrats? I don't care. Honestly, really don't care. Do your best, do your worst. But it speaks to a cultural gap in being able just to talk like a normal human being. And of course, that's going to translate into politics. So,
Eric, I want to ask you about the normal human being thing, because part of being a normal human being is... or part of being, I don't know, an average or stereotypical man in some ways is that there is an appreciation of risk. And this is one of the theories that I have heard very frequently that sort of attempts to explain the gender gap in politics, or at least part of it, is that the Democratic Party has become incredibly risk averse. You see this in policy. What is regulation if not an attempt to sort of weed out risk? You see this in stuff that is sort of policy culture adjacent, like the frustration to like sort of being down on space travel, right? Where you have all these billionaires who want to go to space, and going to space is inherently risky. It's also kind of awesome, right? But like there is this perception, I think, that Republicans are the party that embraces risk, Democrats are the party that wants to avoid all risk, and that is having an effect on young men who are like, yeah, I'd like to actually try and do something that might be physically or financially risky with my life.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I was going to engage with that premise, I would say that these pieces would demonstrate, to kind of build on Matt's point, right? Like, these pieces are written by and about and for the upper middle class and upper classes, people who are reading the New York Times, people who are educated, people who have good jobs. And those are the Americans, that's the cohort of Americans that are overwhelmingly still getting married and still having like traditional relationship structures. So if you're going to like, if that's the thing you're going to gaze at as the like, what's wrong with traditional relationships, like the New York Times is totally missing the ball here, because the more interesting story to tell would be to look at like what's happening in middle class and lower class America, where these same problems are actually, if you consider them problems, I don't even know if they are problems, but if you do think about them that way, then they're certainly much more magnified in those lower classes. But honestly, I just have like so little patience for this whole genre, because like, I mean, the Jean Garrett piece, for example, the whole idea of like, if you don't want to do emotional labor in your relationship, maybe you just shouldn't be in a relationship. Like, that's it. Like, it's not, it doesn't necessarily mean, actually, Reasons Emma Camp had a great way of putting this in a piece she wrote last week. She said, an unhappy relationship is not always a symptom of female oppression. Like, yes, exactly. Like, there are not always broad sociological trends to be found here. And the tendency is to generalize, obviously, because in pieces like this, you have to generalize because nobody wants to hear about your shitty relationship. They want to know about like what it means, capital W, capital I, capital M. But really, relationships are about individuals. That's all they ever are. No one is dating like the average man or the median woman, at least. God, I hope not. That's not what we're seeking. So, we're not building relationships out of the aggregate the way they might put it in Moneyball. And so, I don't know, drawing any sort of like broad sociological conclusions out of this, I'm sorry to like kind of fly off the handle here, but it's sort of like trying to draw big conclusions out of like, I don't know, the fact that male comedians in the 1950s told lots of jokes about their wives. Like, dames, am I right? Like, did that tell us anything about women in the 1950s? No, it didn't. It was just content, and it was content that people enjoyed consuming, maybe. But I think like to the extent there is something going on with men in society and with like gender roles in society and masculinity in society, I think all of that is true. I think all of those things are very much kind of in flux right now in a lot of interesting ways. And this is just like the worst, most boring way to engage with any of that. So I don't know. The New York Times should just do better. The New Yorker should do better. They should just publish more interesting pieces.
Can I just say I have one of the lines pulled up from the piece that Eric just mentioned. And this is a definition of the word, quote unquote, man-keeping from the New York Times. It describes the work women do to meet the social and emotional needs of the men in their lives, from supporting their partners through daily challenges and inner turmoil to encouraging them to meet up with their friends. That is the definition of healthy relationships, period. Is like the most mundane description of what people do in relationships. Incredible stuff. And
people who are educated and have good jobs. Like, this is not a story about a couple of deadbeats, right? It's a story about people who are at least moderately successful in life who just can't figure it out. And that's fine. Like, most relationships end like at some point. It's okay for that to be the case, but it doesn't make it interesting.
I can't believe someone edited that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Okay, Emily, I want to read you one more New York Times headline just from this weekend. We're going to have to reset that counter one more time. This is an opinion column by Maureen Dowd. And it is attention men, books are sexy. So this follows from, I don't know, is a very special kind of attraction, right? Hey, I look books, right? But this follows from a complaint that we've seen growing over the past couple of years, that men don't read, that publishing only caters to female readers, especially where fiction is concerned. There was this photo of a bookstore YA section that was going around. I think it was Substack, social media, over the past week. And it was here as young adult fiction. And every single cover was like pink, yellow, book talk, like very clearly aimed at female readers and only female readers. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that stuff. That's great. The publishing industry should go ahead and do it. And like targeting an audience, wonderful. And book talk sells books. You get why they would be pushing into this market. At the same time, this seems like a problem for the entire, I don't know what you want to call it, like the word cell industry, right? You remember word cells versus shape rotators, right? There's the people who describe the world and then people who sort of actually manage the physical stuff in the world. And the word cell industry, right? The news media, the ideas industry has become so dominated by a left that cannot sell, that cannot market to, that cannot talk to young men, and in particular young men without college degrees. Like, am I wrong there?
No, not at all. I mean, goes back to like Charles Murray described it best in 2012 in Coming Apart. And I think it's the single best book about journalism that really has nothing to do with journalism. He doesn't talk about the media at all in it, but that these patterns of elite sorting, and this is where Maureen Dowd is actually a kind of interesting example, have increased dramatically since like in the course of Maureen Dowd's lifetime. And I think people like her actually, in especially that boomer set, don't totally realize what a bubble they're in because the positions that they have now didn't always come with. I mean, absolutely, there was affluence and, you know, the publishing industry used to be even more lucrative and you could read Graydon Carter's books about people's expense accounts and all of that. It's depressing. But the
guy who was a feature writer who wrote 3 articles a year and was paid $500,000 in 1990s money.
Right. It just flying first class around the world. Just what a life. But that has increased so much since she became a reporter, a journalist. And that's a really significant, I think, problem is people, we always talk about the bubbles themselves, but I think probably the bigger part of that problem is people don't even realize that they're in these bubbles anymore. And like, if you tried to explain this to Maureen Dowd, she might understand it on paper, but unless you're fundamentally like outside of the bubble and spending time with people outside of it, empathizing, loving people outside of it, it's just almost impossible to connect the dots anymore.
There's one of those pieces that you mentioned, Peter, that kind of kickstarted the cycle, which was like, "Hey, man, where'd you go? Come back," written by a woman, and it I think inadvertently points to something that is actually true and actually interesting and a public policy challenge, which is that we have seen this really long-term, steady erosion of dudes being in the labor force, of actually working. Dudes have stopped working in America. And this trend line doesn't exist in any other country. It is in the United States. It's this very persistent long-term decline of able-bodied working age men just choosing not to try to work anymore. And there's an element of this that has to do with disability insurance and more people on disability. That's really increased over the last few years in particular, but it pre-exists all of that by a lot. And it's striking, like every single age cohort compared to 20 years ago, if you like in working age, works less than it did 20 years ago, with the exception of people 55 years and older. That's crazy. The young people, it's very dramatic. People under 24 work a lot less, are in the labor force a lot less than they were before. So people are not gaining that skill of working when they're in high school or whatnot. And that has profound effects. And we haven't figured that out totally. As a policy or social science issue, it is worthy of our attention. It certainly affects all these things that people are talking about, the dating pool, declining birth rates, perhaps a bunch of things that people are otherwise obsessed with. But generally speaking, people are not serious about looking at that problem. And it'll be very interesting, I might add, to see what happens now that we have closed off a lot of immigration. We've reduced immigration numbers and we've reduced illegal immigration numbers very sharply. And so immigrants have always been a source of punching higher than average on joining the labor force. So when you take that off and you have these pre-existing trends, I think a theory of the case from the Trump administration is that we will see that number go up finally. Like that trend will be reversed. I have my doubts about that, but it certainly is very interesting. And it's also something that people generally don't talk about because it's easier to complain about your dating life.
Yeah, so we're about to move on to a discussion of tariffs. And in fact, one of the things you hear from supporters of Trump's tariffs or of a more restrictive Trump-like tariff regime is that they are, among other things, designed to promote male employment and to raise the prospects of men. We're going to talk about that very soon here. We've got a big show coming up. Trump's tariffs and the economy. Is it as good as Trump thinks it is? Viewer question about sports. I'm not going to be answering that one. And Trump is putting his name on things again, and he's making money off of it. Is that corruption, or is it just kind of what Trump does? Okay, so last week, after months of delays and deal-making, Trump's new tariff regime finally went into effect. The particulars are complex and still might be subject to change even while we are recording this podcast. But the short version is that the average tariff rate is now much higher, something like 15 to 20% compared with about 2.5% when Trump took office earlier this year. So Eric, Trump promised 90 deals in 90 days. He said that all of this would be better for American workers and the American economy, for men in particular. There were a number of deals made last week, many at the last minute. So give us an overview. What happened and what does this mean for the economy?
Yeah, there were a number of deals announced last week at the last minute. I don't know that we should consider any of them to be done deals. We really haven't seen any of the fine print on any of those supposed deals. But yeah, we basically now have, without getting too down into the weeds of all the different rates that were set on imports from different countries, you can more or less think about this as a 15% baseline tariff now on just about all imports from around the world, up from the 10% baseline that was set in April, and then some higher tariffs on different places, still based on a kind of nonsensical calculation that the White House did based on trade deficits, which is just silly. And then there's also this random 50% tariff on Brazil because the president is mad about some internal politics in Brazil. And so that's going to help, I'm sure, put more people to work at Rust Belt diners or something like that, except the coffee will now be a bunch more expensive probably. I think when you zoom out from this and then when you sort of jam together the tariff story with the other big story from Friday, which was Trump deciding to fire the director of the Bureau of Labor Statistics after a less than very impressive jobs report, I think what you're starting to see is that data is indeed the plural of anecdotes, as they famously say. And, look, if the jobs data that we got last week really shouldn't be surprising to anybody if you'd been paying attention to the anecdotes. I've been talking to business owners and CEOs since before April, since February and March when Trump first started talking about the Liberation Day tariffs that were going to go into effect on April 2nd. And just about every one of those interviews that I've done has included that other person telling me that, well, we're either going to hold off on some investment or this means we won't hire as many people as we otherwise would have. And this is not just me. This is like every business reporter at the Wall Street Journal and CNBC and dozens of other outlets are doing these interviews with executives and entrepreneurs all over the country. And it's always coming down, the story keeps coming back over and over again to the uncertainty of the tariffs is going to mean we're going to cancel investments, we're going to reduce hiring, and so on and so forth. And so you finally are starting to see that reflected in the data. Nate Silver had a great point that he made last week when he said that, he pointed out that there was an average of 182,000 jobs created per month from January through April since Liberation Day, since the beginning of April through the latest jobs report, down to 35,000 new jobs per month. So from 182 down to 35. It looks to me like Trump had a strong economy until he started putting all the tariffs in place. And we still haven't really felt the effect of the tariffs because so many of those April tariffs ended up getting postponed and are only being implemented now. If you look at the Federal Reserve's Beige Book, which is a sort of anonymous sourcing of, from different, again, executives and CEOs, you get this exact same story. Corporate earning calls over the last few months have told the same story over and over again. One that I reported on just last week was about how Hershey's stands to lose tens of millions of dollars per quarter. GM is losing something like $1 billion per quarter right now because of the tariffs. So the list goes on. And as I said, you can really only be surprised by this data if you're not paying attention to the anecdotes. And you know who hasn't been paying attention to the anecdotes? You know who's been living in a tiny little bubble inside the White House? It's President Donald Trump and his allies and his supporters. They've locked themselves inside this like silly little bubble where tariffs are going to simultaneously raise hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue and apparently just have no trade-offs whatsoever. Like just a week ago, there was what Howard Lutnick was on the Sunday shows doing this victory lap where he was talking about how the Treasury was getting all this new money. New money was the phrase that he was using. $700 billion in annual revenue. He talked about that number itself is wildly exaggerated. But you know what you'd expect to see if the federal government suddenly raised corporate income taxes by $700 billion? You'd expect to see less investment and fewer jobs created. And that's exactly what we're seeing. You can't collect all that revenue. You can't take all that money out of the productive part of the economy and dump it into the government without the trade-offs that the president is now apparently very grumpy about. So congratulations. You got what you wanted, just not in the way you expected.
Yeah, so let's talk about the messaging around this. The Trump supporters have spent the last few months arguing that critics of tariffs were obviously wrong because the critics said the tariffs were going to collapse the economy, and actually things look pretty good. And I would have said they have at least a partial point at least until last week when we got all this new data that Eric mentioned, right? And what that data shows basically is weak jobs numbers. Hiring is mostly in government-supported industries. Most businesses seem to have maybe not started firing people, but they're not picking up new employees. Consumers are pulling back on discretionary spending, even people who are employed who haven't lost their jobs. And there's no manufacturing boom. I mean, there's the manufacturing boom that was supposed to happen just is not there in the numbers, at least not right now. You go back to the 2024 election, the number one issue for voters was the economy. They thought that Biden had bungled it, and I think they had a point. Emily, doesn't it sort of seem like Trump is maybe not doing much better now? I mean, how do you think about the Trump economy here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like the dreaded protectionist here, and I'm a tariff optimist, but I actually don't disagree with anything that Eric just said, because I think it is a question of trade-offs, and you would be foolish to deny that there's going to be a host of negative downstream consequences of it. It's just a matter of whether or not those the cost and the benefits, how it all shakes out in the end. And right now, you saw MAGA take a little bit of a victory lap last week before the jobs numbers came out. And, from a partisan political purpose, that's fine. But from a messaging standpoint, they're going to have to be really careful with that going forward, because if people are feeling the opposite, I mean, I think the New York Times reported today prices in general are up like 3% over the year. That's when you are discordant, like Biden was, until he sort of switched to talking about, what was it, the chips, the bags of chips and all of that getting smaller. Shrinkflation.
Shrinkflation.
Yeah,
Shrinkflation.
Good old shrinkflate.
Hilarious, yeah.
But that's why we were going to subsidize things through the CHIPS Act. Oh, wait, that was about computer chips. Sorry.
That's a different, slightly different chip. Equally delicious. But yes, he really had a problem, and Kamala Harris really had a problem with having to run on the Biden record when people were feeling something different in their own lives, at their own kitchen tables. And to the extent that Donald Trump, when I talk to Republicans on the Hill right now, before they headed out for recess, they were optimistic because the BBB, or the OBBB, as we're supposed to be calling it now, is
the Big Beautiful Bill, or the One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
Exactly. Yes, as it is formally known. That came with a suite of what they see as, though they didn't want to describe it this way, industrial policy. So, the manufacturing exemptions backdated to January and all those kinds of things. And so I asked one member right before recess, Trump is underwater on the economy right now. Are you worried about this? And they basically said, no, that's why we passed the bill when we did, so that by the time the midterms roll around, people are feeling it more in their own lives. And so that is a hell of a gamble, because Trump, to the extent he might think he cannot control the business community. He cannot control the reporting that is suggesting some of this money is starting to get passed down to consumers in ways that it wasn't when there was still some fleeting uncertainty. Now the uncertainty has become certain, and the costs are getting passed down to consumers. So just my final point would be, I think actually reform to disability may be more powerful than tariffs in terms of actually getting people back into the labor force. And that's one thing that nobody had any appetite to take on in OBBB or BBB or whatever we're calling it. So it's a big risk.
OBBBA. Do you pronounce this like ABBA, except ABBA?
We should call it that. But it's a hell of a gamble that they're doing right now.
So since you bring up the Big Beautiful Bill, I want to actually ask you about that and how the interplay between that and tariffs and the political aspect. You wrote about a month ago something to the effect of the Big Beautiful Bill was a bill that no one actually likes, right? And the quote from your piece that I pulled out here was, depending on who you ask, Donald Trump's Republican Party just committed a crime against populism or passed the most populist piece of legislation in modern history. The truth is that while not exactly beautiful, the legislation is pretty close to the best bill he could give either wing of the party, whether the libertarians or the new right. There's some libertarians here on this podcast. I'm not sure they would entirely agree with that, though there's some aspects of the Big Beautiful Bill that we did like here. But there was another New York Times piece, and yes, it's the New York Times, but about how Republicans are dreading going back to their constituents this August during the recess and trying to message this bill that, as you wrote, people don't exactly love.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it's impossible really to have to bridge the gap between Susan Collins and let's say, who else did they have? They had Chip Roy on the one hand, who's not a libertarian, but he's somebody who's a serious fiscal hawk, and Susan Collins, Josh Hawley, and Chip Roy. I mean, that is a really, really, really hard equation to have to solve in a single piece of legislation, which is why Mike Johnson, by the way, was always against governing by omnibus, but we can set that aside for the moment. And just that's the way that you do it is you're basically, Stephen Miller tried to sell this only as an immigration bill. Don't worry about Trump breaking his promise about not cutting anybody's Medicaid. It's just waste, fraud, and abuse. This bill is, what did he say at one point, going to save Western civilization because I think he said it was one of the most important pieces of legislation in saving Western civilization because of the immigration stuff. And so depending on where Republicans right now are going home, I mean, if you're in a safe red district, you're actually probably pretty happy about it, unless it's Missouri and Josh Hawley has to go and answer for people who now have to complete work requirements that they don't want to complete to keep their Medicaid. So it just kind of depends, I think, on where you're going back, because the bill itself could be sort of everything to everyone. But it's basically also, at the end of the day, nothing to everyone because it was just cobbled together. That's why the process is so disgusting. But here we are.
So Matt Welch, Emily Jashinsky is talking to us about people feeling these policies in the economy. And this is something that has been debated, right? This is a big part of the argument about whether people are actually going to feel the effect of these tariffs, because yes, they're kind of a tax, but the tax incidence ends up, according to economists, falling on Americans, right? On ordinary people. And it looks like you can already feel it or see it in some of the data, and Trump doesn't like that. As Eric mentioned, he fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics over this jobs report. Talk me through how to think about Trump firing the data person, the person who is delivering the bad news here, right? Like, in some ways, does this sort of thing work? Does it effectively suppress information, or do people end up feeling this sort of feeling the effects of tariff policies when they try to get a job or go to the grocery store or buy toys for their kids at Christmas?
I think fundamental to all of this is the perennial, centuries-long problem with central planning. Why does central planning always fail? It fails because it is a horrible way to transmit accurate information. That's it. It just is. So governments and central planners, they shape the information that's coming to them in ways that is pleasing to their ears and helpful to them politically. And every one of those little shapings makes that information worse. They act on that information in ways now. This is why you can't do a 5-year plan in a communist country and say, well, I know exactly how much bread to produce. You don't. You can't. The way that you find out that information is through this thing called prices. And when the government is everywhere, then the prices don't surface and tell you what's going on. So yes, this Trump firing the BLS, it's kind of a classic of the form. None of it is surprising. It's bad on its face, and it is very consistent with how he has acted for a long time. And I would just say that part of the problem with tariffs is that it centralizes our central planning. It puts everything in the hands of one person who might get mad at Brazil. That is kind of a problem. What has been an actual growth industry in Washington, D.C. over the last 3 months? Lobbying for tariff exemptions. Last year, there were, I think, 120 lobbying contracts for people who wanted to figure out how to navigate themselves around tariffs. This first 3 months, or the first 3 months of this year, that's been 215 already. It's probably going to go up a hell of a lot more. And so a single person, if you can get Trump's ear, you are going to get an exemption. It just depends on your access to his ear and then his judgment about whether that's advantageous. He has carved out already exemptions for economic activity equaling $1 trillion. So yes, you can put 15% average tariffs, the most we've seen in 100 years, but you're also like putting all of this at the whimsy of one person. That is not going to be like beautifully calibrated economic planning at all. And this was the main reason why eventually 130 years ago, we kind of got rid of tariffs as the way to finance the government, because it was seen as this incredible font of whimsy and personalized corruption. It was a Christmas tree of carve-outs for industries that had enough money to lobby. And then meanwhile, you don't see all of the unseen consequences of long-term investments in the kind of industries that don't begin in the first place. All of this is the problem. So Donald Trump is doing a really audacious thing, saying, I am going to reshape the basic foundations of the American and international economy. That is an incredibly audacious and incredibly arrogant thing to do. And it rises exactly, smacks into that knowledge problem. Do you think that one person is so smart and so gifted and so, infallible? No, of course not. No one person is. The person that I love the most is absolutely fallible. And we're centralizing this. We're ignoring all of this insight that we've had for a really long time about the dangers of that kind of central planning. And eventually we're going to get the effects of it, and prices are going to tangibly go up, and there are going to be negative side effects. The idea that, because the sky hasn't fallen, this proves that it's okay, is a classic, very much moving the goalpost strategy. Actual smart critics like Scott Lincecum and others from Cato have pointed out that you can do some tariffs without crashing the economy. It's just that the economy is not going to be as good as it was before. And I think we're going to be seeing that.
Yeah, it functions like a big tax hike. I mean, it's $360 billion or so based on the current numbers, which, again, might change. But it creates opportunities for corruption, for cronyism, for all of the stuff that, the Drain the Swamp contingent says that they don't like. But what if you ended up giving everyone a carve out or something like one? I think that's actually Josh Hawley's idea, right, Eric? He's got this proposal for $600 tariff-based rebates to everyone. Does that not suggest that tariffs are going to impose costs on everyone? Can you cover those costs with a $600 rebate?
Yeah. I mean, I think it proves that they know that it's causing costs no matter what they say sometimes, or what they'll say when they're on the campaign trail. Yeah, that's a really stupid idea. It's just like, well, we'll have the government collect more money so we can also have them distribute more money, which I know we do for lots of other things too, but it's just like particularly stupid in this case. I did just real quick want to underline something that both Emily and Matt said. Emily talked about how the MAGA crowd took a little bit of a victory lap last week, and Matt talked about this idea that like, oh, well, the sky hasn't fallen, so that means everything's okay with the tariffs. Like one, okay, most of the tariffs haven't really been in effect yet, so we're only starting to see the consequences of them. I'm not saying the sky's going to fall either. I think it's probably true that most of the consequences are on the margins. That's what the economists say. But I think it's worth thinking about those two things, because that is, Matt said, move the goalposts, and that's exactly what's happening here. The tariff advocates were telling us a few months ago that we were going to be brought into, like, we're going to be wealthier than we've been since the 1890s, or whatever Trump's line was that he kept using, right? That this was going to be a new golden age of America. And now the line is, well, the sky hasn't fallen, so I guess that means the policy's a success. Like, what? That's an incredible shift on the part of the people who are advocating for this policy. Like, they're now saying, well, all these little harms are not a problem because, the economy isn't literally in recession. The Wall Street Journal ran an op-ed last week. The headline was, if Trump's tariffs are bad, why is there no recession? Like, you've just picked up the goalposts and moved them to the other end of the field at that point. So I think it's just absurd for people like, and Oren Cass has been on this for a while now too. It's just absurd for this argument to be like, now the justification for tariffs is that they're not causing a recession. Yeah, well, they're causing, and they are going to cause a lot of other problems. So even if the sky doesn't fall, they're still bad, and we should still oppose them.
There was a Jason Furman piece. Jason Furman is an Obama advisor, or was, a Democratic White House economic policy advisor who has been critical of Democrats in some interesting ways. And he basically said, well, sure, things haven't collapsed, but basically the effect that we have seen from the tariffs is, imagine if every American household just took $1,000 and lit it on fire, right? That doesn't cause your total household budget to completely collapse. It doesn't mean that everything
and I
is
think
over.
that actually undersells it. The Yale Budget Lab projects $2,400 is going to be the annual hit to the average household. So, you're talking a $600 rebate against a $2,400 tax hit, basically, a hidden tax.
But you're just poor. Emily, if you are going to defend the tariffs here, if you are the tariff optimist, close us out. Like, why should we be optimistic about this?
Yeah, well, so, I mean, I think on the one hand, there's a lot that Trump has, I think, completely bungled with the implementation of the tariffs. And I think everyone who is even like protectionist that's not working in the White House would tell you that's probably true. I mean, doing it as the president, there's a reason he's doing it as the president, not going through Congress. He doesn't have support of Congress, and that creates all kinds of different problems. But I think right now, there's so much uncertainty that I think these as cronyist as that's not the way that I would have done it, but the big, beautiful bill policy is with exemptions for manufacturing and all of that stuff. I mean, it opens up all kinds of, like Matt was talking about, lobbying. There was lobbying involved in all of that for sure. But basically, I think it's jury is out, and you guys will all disagree with me on this, but I think to some extent, the jury is out on what this does to communities that could use more jobs. I'm not just talking about manufacturing, but communities that could use, different plants returning to the United States, not doing things in Mexico. There are, I mean, if we're talking about anecdotes and data, there are some anecdotes that have been good so far, but that is what it is. We'll see what's in the long run. But my short would just say my short pitch would just be that there's so much uncertainty. I don't know what Trump's tariff rates are going to be. We passed the August 1st deadline. That in and of itself, there's some leverage that comes with uncertainty, but in the long term, he needs to be, that's what worries me the most, is that he needs to be careful with the costs of the uncertainty at this point as he's going into more than a half a year of it. So I just think the jury's out. I'm not declaring victory or ceding, but some signs in both directions.
But he's the one who's stirring the uncertainty, Emily, right? Like who changes agree. Week to week, changes what's going to happen here. Like it can't, this is fully on him. Whatever happens, it's fully on him.
He definitely sees it as his strategy. Like he's stoking the uncertainty intentionally. That's his.
He loves it because he loves making deals. And that is how he has always operated, is don't tell people what you're going to do. Let's make a deal and then we'll go from there. And he doesn't have a strategy for 6 months from now. He doesn't even have a strategy for 6 hours from now, because that's how he likes to work. I think that this, I don't think that this is going to end up bringing back a lot of manufacturing jobs. I think what it's going to end up doing is pushing forward automation. We're going to see a lot of innovation in the automation space, but not a lot of jobs here. All right, we have a listener question about sports coming up right after this. These days, it feels like there's advice for everything. Cold plunges, gratitude journals, screen detoxes. But how do you know what actually works for you? With the internet and information overload about mental health and wellness, it can be a struggle to know what's true and what actions to take. Using trusted resources and talking to live therapists can get you personalized recommendations and help you break through the noise. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform. It serves over 5 million people globally, and it works. There's an App Store rating of 4.9 out of 5 based on over 1.7 million client reviews. It's also convenient. You can join a session with a therapist at the click of a button. It helps you fit therapy into your busy life. Plus, you can switch therapists at any time. As the world's largest online therapy provider, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/roundtable. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/roundtable. All right, our listener question comes from Eric, not this one, and it's about college sports. Can we get a discussion on the podcast about one of the most interesting deregulatory and now re-regulatory stories of the past decade, NCAA restrictions on player pay and movement? This went from a highly regulated market with no player pay and limited school mobility with a likely black market for talent to a less regulated market through allowing via name, image, and likeness, or NIL deals, and player movement through the transfer portal. Now there are attempts to re-regulate the market via Congress, executive actions, and lawsuits. Deloitte is even telling players their fair market value in assessing new deals for validity. This doesn't even cover impacts to non-revenue sports, Title IX, etc. Eric, I know you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm sort of two minds about this, but I think about it as both from the perspective of like a fan of college sports, which I am, and then also from the perspective of the players. From the fans' perspective, it's a little bit frustrating. I think most people would agree with me on that. At least it's been a little frustrating to me. I'll share a little story to explain why. So I graduated from Fairfield University, which is a small Division I program. We have not been to March Madness since I attended. We haven't been there since the 90s, right? It's been like this long wait. We keep getting close, but not quite winning the last game. 2 years ago, we had a really good team, one of the best teams in our little crappy conference, and they made it all the way to the conference championship game, and there were these 4 guards on the team, 4 little guys who could all hit 3-pointers and all drive to the basket, and it was just like they were in, you couldn't defend them because they had 4 different guys who could score on any given night. One of them was a senior, and he graduated, but the other 3 were underclassmen, and so you think the traditional model of college sports tells you like, yes, this is great, we're going to be good for years to come. Okay, well, the one guy graduated. The other 3 were Bryson Goodine, who transferred to Oklahoma, Jalen Leach, who transferred to Northwestern, and Jasper Floyd, who transferred to the University of North Texas, all bigger programs, obviously, than tiny little Fairfield University. And so they were all gone after 1 year. And then the Fairfield Stags, unfortunately, were very bad this past year. And so that's, as a fan, it's a little bit frustrating because it's like, man, we had these guys, we had them, and we could have finally gotten to the promised land. And so, I feel that. On the other hand, from the players' perspective, which is who we should actually care about here, all 3 of those players had a great season at Fairfield. They excelled, and then they were rewarded for that by getting to go to bigger programs, probably getting some sort of NIL money. I have no idea what their packages were, in that regard, but almost certainly better facilities, better coaching, better opportunities to move on and play professionally or something like that after they're done with their college years. So, like, that's great. That's the market working. Like, that's people are being rewarded for their success and being given more opportunities because they've been successful. And so I applaud that, even if like a little tiny bit of my heart breaks, because I know it does make it a lot harder for the small schools to like actually build up a team that will be good for the long term.
Emily, this question mentions Title IX, which basically tries to mandate some sort of gender equality in school sports. What do you think about the implications there?
Well, first of all, I think Eric just made my tariff case for me. We should tariff trades. There's something just so much more emotionally satisfying about the team that grew up together, succeeding together, if it does, in fact, succeed. And that's, I guess, the open question. But I, am not that old, but I'm old enough to remember when conservatives were critical of Title IX and then just sort of suddenly became the biggest defenders of Title IX in the name of women's sports. And I've been curious for a long time to see if the tide turns once again back to really where it rightfully should be, which is looking at how Title IX actually does have a significant impact. We started the show talking about men and men finding spaces to spend time together. I've been curious for a long time as to when conservatives would start having the conversation about the downstream consequences of Title IX on men's sports again, because that has always been vindicated. The position of the conservatives who were against what Richard Nixon did was vindicated like year in, year out. And conservatives were always taking victory laps on it. So I think the time for the right to once again hate women's sports is upon us.
Okay, that's not the take I was expecting, but all right, Matt Welch, do you have anything to say here?
Just that when we think about college sports, there's kind of 2 different things that are happening, and they are very different things. One is that up until the recent changes, elite college sports, the tip of the iceberg of college sports, was a minor league grooming system for major league sports, particularly in basketball and football. And everyone knew this. And as a result of this, the best college coaches at the biggest schools made more money than any state employee anywhere outside of corrupt little towns in South Los Angeles. Incredible amounts of money, just sick, stupid amounts of money, because you could artificially restrain the labor market and say these adults, these 18, 19-year-olds who are really there so they can get groomed enough so that they can go into the pros and make their real money. we're going to bar them from making money. So that was understandably eventually declared illegal. You can't really do that anymore. And that's good. We should want those people to be able to be rewarded for their work. Again, though, that's just the tip of the iceberg of college athletics. The rest of college athletics are people just in college playing athletics. And those people are not going to the pros. They're not going to make a lot of money. Maybe they can make a little bit if they're locally famous at something. But for the most part, they're just playing sports in college. And so there you can build up those kind of team loyalties and everything. When you disrupt a system that's been going the way that it had been for a half a century or more, then that disruption is going to be a lot at once. And so you do have this sort of transfer portal. Whole conferences are collapsing. It's just very strange. And what people are encountering as part of that is that the sort of below surface market, right? The ones where you follow UC Santa Barbara baseball because you do, not necessarily because it produces a lot of major leaguers, although they're producing more these days. So if that is being totally disrupted and if they're collapsing those conferences, then you're going to lose this audience, and that audience is going to be mad. So it makes sense that after they've done this big deregulatory push, that now people are saying, okay, and trying to sort of recalibrate so that the tip of the iceberg can still make its money and not be artificially restrained, but that you're not ruining this other market that people enjoy because they like the enthusiasm and just bizarre team loyalties of the broader college athletics.
Yeah, so I'm not the sports guy on this podcast, as everybody knows, but I think the underrated thing in thinking about all of this is that higher ed, as we know it, is about to change dramatically, not because of sports funding, not because of any of these rules, but just because of population decline. And higher ed is going to be in decline, and everything is going to be different about academia as a result. All right. As a reminder, we love to answer your questions. We love it so much that we are answering even more of them on YouTube. It's a little bonus show we call Table for Two every week. If you have a question for the Roundtable, please email us your short, succinct, pithy, and otherwise not very long question to podcast@reason.com. That's podcast@reason.com. Speaking of sports, Trump just opened a new Trump-branded golf course in Scotland. He and his family are probably going to make some money off of it. This is the sort of thing that Trump has been doing for about as long as he has been in the public eye. He puts his name on hotels, on country clubs, sneakers, steaks. I think those were real. On meme coins. And then everyone in his family also does the same. Matt Welch, you wrote about this. I take it you do not appreciate the president's entrepreneurial initiative.
I don't think that the president of the United States should, while he's presidenting, should open up businesses that are branded to his last name that are leveraged by his presidentness, and then profiting off of it and having his children make a lot of money off of it. I think that it's just on its face super gross and wrong ethically, and that kind of everybody knows that. And has just figured out, it's just like decided, well, it's Trump. But it's lousy. I mean, the guy started a $ Trump meme coin, and then they make money off every single trade, whether it's going up or going down. And of course, it went down like most meme coins do. And then just to sort of like boost things, said, okay, we're going to have an exclusive dinner of the biggest 220 holders of the meme coin in Washington, D.C. We're going to have a great gay old time. I think it was in Washington, D.C. And so a whole bunch of dirty foreigners and other rich people said, cool, I will show you all of my holdings. I'll get to go to the dinner. There was even a VIP among that. That generated $148 million worth of activity on that meme coin. The entire Trump family benefited from this. Is just happening in plain sight. And so one can choose to say, well, you know, what about the Biden crime family until you turn blue in the face? But at some point, I'm just looking at you and saying that you're ridiculous. Because what about the Biden crime family? That's bad. We don't like crimes. We don't like, fail sons doing a bunch of crack and getting $1.2 million jobs at Burisma. That's super bad. And
we're
also, did
okay
you know that
with
Jared
the crack
Kushner,
part, to be clear?
Jared Kushner got $2 billion from the Saudi Royal Wealth Fund. Saudi Arabia, super great country. So got like $2 billion from a fund that's managed by Prince bin Salman, who chopped up that one dude or ordered that to be chopped up. And he did this 6 months after leaving the office, at which he had been doing a whole lot of Middle East related diplomacy. It's happening in plain sight. It's very bad. It's gross. And grubby, and I recommend reading Jack Schaefer's very informed and detailed piece in the Washington Post from July about Trump's honest graft is how he put it. Includes a lot of details for those interested, and I think that as citizens we should be interested in people using the presidency or using public office in general very, very nakedly to enrich themselves and enrich their families. We shouldn't be doing that.
Hunter Biden was making from Burisma about what you would make for writing 3 articles a year for Vanity Fair in the 1990s, as far as I can tell.
Same amount of crack, too.
Vanity Fair was a good magazine. I'm not sure Burisma was equally good as an oil company.
Emily, Matt Welch says that this is wrong, that it's gross, that the comparisons to Hunter Biden, they don't excuse Donald Trump at all. So I guess I want to ask you, first of all, just do you agree that this is upsetting or we should be opposed to it? But second of all, is it actually different from what we've seen, not just from Hunter Biden, but from the Clintons? I mean, we remember the Clinton Global Initiative, which was just this massive slush fund that allowed the Clintons to do kind of quasi-corrupt stuff and live large on it.
It's not fundamentally, like, conceptually different. And I think part of the reason Trump feels comfortable doing it, he ran in 2016 by saying, I know the system, therefore I alone can fix it, which I think numbed people to his abuse of the system, because he said openly, I have abused the system. Basically, he said, I have abused the system, therefore I can fix the system. And so when he does abuse the system, his supporters rightfully will point back to the Bidens and the Clintons and say, he's not doing, if anything, this is more open because he's posting about it on Truth Social. If anything, we know more about this. It's transparent, most transparent administration in history. But this is on another scale from Hunter Biden and the Clintons. We have no idea. I mean, at one point, I haven't checked recently, but at one point in the spring, Trump's meme coin was held predominantly by a handful of foreign investors. We have absolutely no way of knowing who those people are, knowing what conversations they have had because of their holdings in the meme coin, which is what that entire fundraiser was all about, or that entire event was all about. It was fundamentally access peddling. It is why Hunter Biden was holding court at Cafe Milano and bringing his dad in to shake hands with people, except it is, again, on another scale. This does also apply to Don Jr. and Eric Trump and the entire Trump organization, who I will say are doing it more openly than Hunter Biden. Jared Kushner as well has the Middle Eastern portfolio, immediately leaves office and raises $2 billion from the Saudis. I mean, it's just like completely naked. I'm not sure that we've seen anything like it in modern history. I do think that the permission structure changed because the media was overly tolerant and with a double standard of corruption on the left for a long time, and Trump exploited that. Doesn't make it okay or excusable. Doesn't mean that it's any more comforting of a precedent to set. And I think, if anything, that point is underscored by the fact that the scale is even more vast than what we saw from Hunter Biden and the Clintons.
Well, part of the thing with the media is that they went after Trump in a way that made it seem like, at least to him and to his supporters, that no matter what he did, he was going to be accused of being corrupt. And so maximizing corruption on his part, at least from his perspective, I don't agree with this argument, to be clear, but I think I can understand how somebody would think this way, is that from his perspective, look, you're going to call me corrupt no matter what I do. So I might as well be as corrupt as I can be and incredibly open about it and make some money while I'm at it.
Yeah, his net worth has skyrocketed since the meme coin launched. Like, it's a huge increase. So
I think I saw that it doubled. It's doubled since he's been president the second time.
Tells you what you need to know.
Eric, final question for you here. There are people, even libertarians, who say, you know what, who cares? This is a distraction. Let's just pay attention to governance. How do we balance this sort of thing against policymaking? We're libertarians who think that, like, we should judge the president on policy. So, like, how much does this matter in that scheme of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's gross and filthy, and we can judge the president for engaging in gross, filthy behavior. I pretty much co-sign everything that Matt and Emily already said on that regard. I guess the thing I'd add as a political point is that it's a really weird form of populism to be like lining your own pockets and building yourself an opulent ballroom at the White House and so on and so forth, while you're also implementing policies that will make people materially poorer and will particularly hurt people of lower income levels and like will take $2,000 out of the median American household. I don't know. I keep being told by the MAGA people that this is what we voted for. So I guess this is what you voted for. But I'm really confused by how that's a populist agenda. Like isn't the whole point of Trump that he's not like Clinton and the Bidens, but then he engages in the exact same behavior, but more openly. So I don't know. I'm really confused by how anybody can look at that and be okay with it. But I'm told that there are many people who are. So here we are.
He's not like the Clintons and the Bidens in that he admits it. And I think actually Emily's point about the transparency of it and the sort of the blatantness of it in some ways, I don't think that it excuses it or makes it any better. At the same time, there's a way in which it makes it a little bit harder to criticize, a little bit harder to say, well, look, he's sneaking around. He's not embarrassed by it. And because he is not embarrassed by it, that makes it harder to go after him because it's not a hypocrisy thing.
I guess I just add one more thing, which is that like Trump should resign tomorrow for a whole bunch of reasons. But for the purposes of this conversation, if he resigned tomorrow and then he was doing all this stuff, we wouldn't care and go at it. Make your net worth whatever it can be, but do it as a private citizen. Don't do it while you're president of the United States.
So long as it's fundamentally legal, I think we would not care that much about it. Certainly not as much as we do. All right, let's move on to our final segment. Some things we do care about are cultural consumption. Books, movies, TV shows, games, museum exhibits, other pop culture tidbits that we have been consuming this week. Matt Welch, let's start with you.
I watched, as did many Americans, the 2-part HBO documentary on Billy Joel, And So It Goes. And it was great. I enjoyed it very, very much. I wouldn't describe myself as a Billy Joel fan, although I do like a lot of his songs and a couple of his albums. But I learned a whole bunch, or at least I relearned stuff that I had forgotten. It has pretty thoroughgoing participation of not just Billy Joel, but like all 4 of his wives. He's burned through various kids and half brothers. You learn stuff about his family, which I didn't quite fully grok, about how his dad skipped out and he had to go track him down 16 years later in Vienna. His grandparents left in Germany from Nuremberg, like by just the hair on the back of their neck, just barely. A lot of interesting details. It's appreciative of his music. It's kind of presented as a little bit of a corrective to those who have dismissed his artistic output. Rock critics in particular just sneered at him. There's great participation by Stephen Hayden, who's one of my favorite rock critics out there, who kind of like gets into the whys and wherefores of all of that. And it's very warts and all. He's still not a very happy person. Don't think he's really quit drinking. And it's very good. It was executive produced by Tom Hanks, directed by Susan Lacey and Jessica Levin. I consume a lot of rock documentaries. This is my favorite one in a good while. And does a lot of the warts, despite his obvious participation in it all. So it makes it more compelling than your average artist executive produced documentary.
Eric, what do you have?
So I'll just mention that Billy Joel was awarded an honorary doctorate by Fairfield University back in 1991. I had to look up the year, but I knew that was something we had done. So, go Stags. Slip that mention in once again. I went to see Millington, which is a ska band. I went to see them at Jam and Java, which is this tiny little concert venue out in the DC suburbs in Vienna, Virginia. I love Jam and Java. It's a really terrific venue. I know a lot of people in DC don't ever go out to Northern Virginia as a rule, but you should. It's a really cool little space. And Millington is an awesome band. Been one of my favorite bands for years, so I'm glad I finally got to see them a couple weeks ago there. They are what if Blink-182, but with a horn section. And they're pretty open about this. Like, this is exactly exactly the vibe they're going for. It's like a late 90s, early 2000s pop punk kind of second wave emo sound, but they're also a ska band. And they don't even actually call themselves a ska band. They call themselves a brass emo band, which really sums it up. I totally love that. They're from Albany, New York, for people who care about these sorts of things. And the lead singer, Corey Kanonsky, has this like really just awesome, whiny, nasally voice, like the Tom DeLonge voice. You know, you can hear it in your head right now. A lot of jangly guitar riffs, drums that are up high in the mix, and just like nonstop energy. These dudes had a tremendous time on stage playing in front of, this was like a couple hundred people, right? Like, but they were giving it their all on a Sunday night in Vienna, Virginia. And here's my pitch. Here's my pitch for ska in general, because I know it's easy to roll your eyes at this, right? But totally unserious, totally unironic here. It is impossible not to smile while you're listening to ska music. Like, just try it. You cannot do it. So Spotify tells me that Millington has a couple more shows on this current tour in like Durham, North Carolina and Atlanta. So if you're in those places, you will not be disappointed. Check them out. If you're not in those places, look them up on Spotify or Apple Music. Summer Disease, Welcome Home, Solo, J45, which was the first song of theirs that I really loved. You can't go wrong with any of those. Their new EP is called Better Safe and Sorry. And like I said, you can't not smile when you're listening to ska. So give it a shot. Millington.
On the one hand, I'm pretty sure you just described someone's voice as being awesome because it was whiny and nasally.
It's the Tom DeLonge voice. You can hear it in your head right now.
And on the other hand, I listened to the OC Supertones when I was a kid. I get it. On the other hand, emphasis on I listened hasn't happened in a while. Emily,
Still
what
great.
do you have for us?
Still great.
Listening or going to see an Albany-based ska band that doesn't refer to itself as a ska band at a place called Jammin' Java is as sure a sign as I've ever seen that the 90s are back. But other than that,
it's ska and big pants all the way down.
Well, here's another example. So I did watch the Happy Gilmore 2 over the weekend. Fine, disappointing, not great. I guess I shouldn't have been disappointed, but it's fine. It's worth a watch if you love Happy Gilmore. But also, last night I watched the first Disney movie I've watched in like probably half a decade, if not more, the live action Lilo and Stitch. For some reason, I think the advertising just really got to me. Stitch popping out of popcorn buckets, whatever. Had to get on this trend, and something happened in them taking it from animation to live action that to me felt sadistic. Like the plot of Lilo and Stitch, when you're watching real humans other than Stitch acted out, is it just feels sadistic. Like they are twisting the knife at every emotional low note in a way that is inappropriate for children. And even like it wrecked me as an adult. It wrecked me. It was a really rough watch. So that there's no spoilers needed. If you know the plot of Lilo and Stitch, they will not let off the gas the entire movie. And so I actually found it to be more like heart-wrenching than pleasurable.
What did you make of the plot line about the social worker which is much more emphasized in the live action version than it is in the cartoon? I love the cartoon. I thought the live action version was functional, but not great. But the social worker plot line where it's like, hey, you have to sign up for what you presume to be Medicaid, or you can't, keep your family together. I mean, it wasn't quite that the social worker was the hero, but we were also meant to understand that, like, in some ways, the right thing to do for this family was to give themselves over to the state. Right.
Well, although that's a questionable interpretation, but a possible one. I turned to my boyfriend halfway through the movie and I said, this movie is anti-government and pro-law enforcement. This is the MAGA Lilo and Stitch. This is Doge meets Back the Blue all in one film. Wow. Because I think you could also interpret
Stitch is blue.
Stitch is blue, yeah. But it's pro CIA, which is really interesting.
Yes, it is. It really is.
I read the social worker plot as kind of anti-government because it seemed like they ended up finding kind of a loophole, if anything, and that was sort of seen as the right solution. And I thought the social worker came across as nagging and unfair in a great way, actually a really accurate way. So that was my take on Doge meets Back the Blue, Lilo and Stitch in 2025.
I like that interpretation better. All right, so I am a millennial man, elder millennial man, which means I watched the Naked Gun reboot. It's a legacy sequel. Stars Liam Neeson as the son of Leslie Nielsen's great Frank Drebin Jr. of Police Squad. I say this in the most complimentary possible way. This movie is incredibly stupid, and I loved it. I loved it so much. So in this movie, you have an evil Musk-like billionaire who like is an electric car guy, right? And there's a suspicious death, and you can tell that the billionaire did it, right? But he's like, yeah, do you suspect something foul? And Liam Neeson, who was nominated for an Oscar for Schindler's List, who played Michael Collins, who has one of the great, deep, gravelly movie trailer, I'm coming to get you because you took my daughter, Taken voices. He responds in that voice, in total deadpan, no, I don't think a chicken could have done this. And the whole movie is like that. And I loved it. If this is your brand of humor, this movie is for you. And like I said, it's specifically for millennial men. There was a box office report, in fact, that was like, this movie did better than expected because of elder millennial and Gen X men, because of guys like me who love puns.
Any ska in it?
There was no ska, very sadly. No ska, no blue aliens, no social workers, just Liam Neeson deadpanning his way through some of the best puns I have heard in a movie theater in a very long time. All right, folks, that is our show. As always, if you like this podcast, you can support us by going to reason.com/donate. That is reason.com/donate. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Emily Jashinsky and Eric Boehm, for joining us today. The Reason Roundtable will return.